if we look at what we've done, okay, what we've done is we've talked about remote desktop solutions and looked at all the options and possibly the cloud, possibly on premises and a hybrid version as well. And then we decided that we're going to look at Horizon, VMware Horizon, integrated with our VMware vSphere infrastructure. And then we spent a couple of weeks just building the Horizon environment. Okay, that's installing getting the infrastructure working. That's the vCenter, ESXi, TrueNAS, downloading that, but then basically installing the prerequisites, what's required in Active Directory, what's required in vCenter itself. And then we also installed the connection server, which is the main player in our little environment, the main player. And on that, we had our SQL server. And like we said, ideally, it shouldn't be on the same server. But because we needed it due to our limited resources, we kept it on the same server. But if you take the instructions that we did in creating the SQL Express server, obviously SQL Express is a cut down version of the full Microsoft SQL server. So, but the procedure is the same. It's just that it's a limited version for play, for practice, for learning, which is what we're doing instead of full-on SQL server. But taking those instructions, you can similarly deploy that on a network server and still connect to it from our Horizon server. We installed Horizon server, and then that took quite a bit, a couple of weeks actually. So then the week after that, we created what's called a virtual desktop image, which is what we're going to use as a basis of all our virtual desktops. And then finally last week, what we did was create using that desktop image. And after we had that, after we had the virtual desktop image, we took that image and we basically created what's called a desktop pool. And eventually by the end of last week's worksheet, and finally we see some results. Hopefully when you get there, Roman, you'll see it. Finally, we get to see some results of our virtualization desktop, and we should have seen that we were able to connect from our Active Directory user, Evan Zerfel, and we were able to use the browser, and we were able to connect to a instance of the desktop, virtual desktop, and that basically was spawned onto the vCenter, and basically that became a member of the domain, and you could access the virtual desktop and the programs that were already installed as part of the desktop, such as that example of the Brave browser was present, and you could use it and ping the domain controller, for example, so you can see that it could participate or work on the virtual network it was connected to. And it was all stored on our TrueNAS shared storage, running on our ESXi infrastructure with the vCenter as a management. We should have seen that after we've connected to that initial instant clone, a secondary clone was generated because we're always going to keep one spare ready for that next user to connect to. So the next couple of weeks, this week and next week, we're going to look at what we can do with group policies. Okay, so obviously group policies we've learned about in the past, and there's literally thousands of settings already, but the settings we're going to talk about today are what we can actually do for the Horizon. Okay, so let's quickly get into that. So we'll get rid of that, and we'll go to the Manage AD. So this presentation is going to be a little bit boring at times because of the fact we're talking about individual desktops, GPO settings. Okay, and that's and there's a lot of them, but we're not going to talk about every one of them. Obviously, it's crazy, but we're going to talk about a couple of them. Okay, and in our worksheet again, we're not going to do every one of them because it's just too much, and you'll realize a lot of them is just you enable it or you don't enable it. Okay. So let's get into what we're talking about today. So today we're going to actually, let's just remember what group policies are for. Group policies are for configuring lots of computers or users and their environments at once, okay? So there's no point using group policies if you're only needing it for one person, for example. One person, you could easily just do it for them. But if it's one person or it's many people and they need the same configuration, that's where GPO shines, because we just do it once and it's configured every time we actually deploy a new instant clone. So today we're going to look at managing the horizon with Active Directory GPOs. So today's objective is to optimize and configure how a user interacts with the virtual desktop. Okay, so don't forget, they're using their end device to connect to their virtual desktop. And obviously that's not normal, okay? So normally we have a physical machine in front of us, an operating system there, the resources we need are plugged into that device, and then we can use it straight away. So today we're going to actually look at configuring the ability to attach USB devices, copy and paste or cut and paste between their virtual desktop and their endpoint device, and how the display protocols work. So by the end of the worksheet, you'll see that we'll be configuring our systems to launch the window in full screen. We'll be redirecting the copy and paste from our physical end device to the virtual desktop. We'll be actually connecting our USB drives, like USB stick, that we plug into our physical device, and it will be accessible from the virtual desktop. And there's a few other things as well, such as printers and audio output, but depending on your situation, you might not be able to hear the audio, or you might not have a printer on your computer, but that's something we'll look at later. So first of all, okay, remember when we looked at, okay, so not everyone who's studying, sorry, I should be a little bit careful, because obviously I teach you mainly in the networking area, and if you've completed a Cert 4 in networking, you would have looked at group policies a lot more than if you just completed a Cert 4 in system admin. So obviously I've got Roman here in my class, physical classroom, and every time I look at him, I remember he did a subject with me where we did at the second level of server, Microsoft Server that is, and we looked at group policies, we looked at VPN, we looked at DFS, and we looked at a few other things as well. So therefore, when I see him, and I can remember that we actually looked at group policies in quite a bit more detail than what you guys might have done if you came through the Cert 4 system administration path. So you might have touched upon group policies as far as mapping the drives and maybe even executing some login scripts and stuff like that, but there's a lot more. One of those things is that besides what's included in the current group policies, all the settings, literally thousands of settings in the group policy, what's already included, you can extend those. You can extend those by adding more templates in, and that's what we have to do, okay? So first of all, Active Directory configuration. So basically, before we can actually do this, we need to have Active Directory, first of all. With control management features and configuration for your virtual desktop machines are managed through the Active Directory group policies. Some policy options, we deliver those policy options through pre-built AMDX files or the template files. All right, so some of the configurable features, these are general areas, are inclusive of the graphic experience, how the graphics are rendered, how the clipboard, we mentioned how we can copy and paste between the end device and the virtual desktop. We can enable or disable the cut and paste between endpoint and the virtual desktop. We can, the pre-built ADMX templates can be downloaded along with the rest of the Horizon software. Okay, but if I look at this, this is a screenshot. So this is a, this particular one is the zip file. Okay, and obviously you got various versions. This is an older version where we've got this picture, but basically it's the file format is like that. Okay, so it's a zip file. So first of all, you have to unzip it. Okay, and zip it, and then you have to put it onto the domain controller. So don't forget that there's no group policies unless you have Active Directory domain. And when we create a new group policy object, it basically gives you all the settings that's available if they are known by the domain controller. And how do we make the domain controller know about these new settings that's specific to Horizon? Is that we need to actually unzip that bundle, that zip file that we just talked about. It contains 18 administrative templates or AMDX files, ADMX files, sorry. And these files need to be copied to the C Windows policy definition folder of the domain controller. Okay, it has to be in that folder. If it's not that folder, the group policy won't be able to find it. It's just like you wanting to read a book. If it's not in the library, how can you find the book, right? So basically, same idea. It has to be in there. Then inside of that folder, there's another folder. So there's a there's a ENUS folder. Sorry. So these ADMX files go into that policy definitions place, but sorry, here we go. Yeah, so they look very similar, these two slides. I'm getting myself confused. So these ADMX files go into that policy definitions files, but there's also these ADML files, which are your configuration files. And they're again they're again in that zip file, but it's in a folder called ENUS, as it stands for English US. Okay, unfortunately, most of the world think US is the main thing, and obviously Microsoft, as well as a lot of these companies, are from the US, and obviously it's US centric. Unfortunately, we're in Australia, and I would have much preferred ENAUS or something like that instead of US, but it is what it is. We use what it is. They're not going to change it just because we live in Australia. Okay, so it contains these ADML files as well in this folder, and again we copy these ADML files to the same area, but inside a ENUS folder on the domain controller. Okay, organizational requirements. Okay, so obviously, if you remember back to the group policies, we can actually create group policies that link it not to groups, domain local groups or global groups, not to groups, even though the name says group policies, not for groups. I can't say that loud enough. It's not for groups. It is for organizational units and containers. Okay, so we can only link group policies to organizational units or other containers inside of Active Directory. So basically, we need an OU in the Active Directory where all the virtual desktops are placed. Okay, and if you remember back in the first worksheet, we actually did that, didn't we? We called it the virtual desktops OU. Yeah, okay, you remember that? So we already have that area, and if in the last worksheet, in fact, we told the virtual desktops to join Active Directory automatically and to be placed inside that OU specifically. So that OU is already there, and we put it there. It's not going to be there unless you put it there, and we will then now create these group policy objects and attach it to that OU, so it only applies to virtual desktops. Because all of these, obviously group policy can be applied to real computers or physical computers or virtual computers. But all of these settings that we're going to talk about are pointless for the physical computers. So we don't want to accidentally apply these group policies to the physical computers because it just doesn't work. So basically, we need an OU in Active Directory where virtual desktops will be placed. This allows for easier management of these computers without the use of filtering. So if you remember when we are in networking, if you're a networking student, that is, we talked about filtering. We can do security filtering, and we can actually use global groups to represent users and computers in deciding which users or computers will actually get the OU. So the OU might be applied to a high level in the hierarchy, but we might specify filtering to say only certain groups of computers or users get it, but that's extra work. So if we actually have an OU, we actually can apply it directly to these things without worrying about filtering. And next week, we're going to talk about some of these group policies for user accounts. Today, we're going to only look at the computer account, computer settings. So hopefully, if you remember, under every group policy, there's a computer and user as the two major nodes. Okay, so if it's a computer setting, it follows the computer. Doesn't matter where it is, how it is. If it's that computer, it's that part of it's in that OU, and it's getting that group policy. It doesn't matter which user is sitting on it or using it. It will get all those settings. If it's a user setting, it's the opposite. It doesn't matter which computer the user is sitting on. but that those settings will follow the user to whichever computer. All right, so these computer ones would definitely be only for virtual desktops, whereas the user ones, we'll see later next week, that could be also applied to possibly the physical desktop, because what if you had an environment where sometimes the user sits on a physical desktop and sometimes they sit on a virtual desktop. So we might have to do a little bit more to make sure that they only, if those settings require it, they only apply to virtual desktops. So because, you know why? Because some of these, if a physical desktop gets some of these group policies, it actually might reduce the performance of the physical machines. The OU structure under this may depend on the complexities of your organization. What does that mean? Just because we've got an organizational unit for all virtual desktop doesn't mean that's it. What if we need lots and lots of virtual desktops? What if we had 5, 6, 7 different departments and they all need different virtual desktops? Because maybe for sales they need these apps, or this image, and for production they need this other simple image and simple apps. So if anytime you have different departments or different complexities in your organization and they need different virtual virtual desktop images, then you could have sub OUs, and where you can actually apply specific group policies to each of these sub OUs. Okay, and then we can actually create that pool like we did last week and tell it to be placed in different parts of the Active Directory structure into a sub-organizational unit rather than just that top level virtual desktops organizational unit. So of course, any situation can get a lot more complex than what we're doing in classroom. So if we look at this, configuring the group policy objects or GPOs, that we're going to just call them GPOs from now on. The Horizon GPOs can be configured as normal with the group policy management console. So if you've done group policies before, this tool shouldn't be unfamiliar. But if you look at this, we talked about the computer configurations. That's what we're going to focus on today. You notice that there's under the administrative templates area, after we create those, add those AMDLs and AMDX files, you'll see that besides what we normally have, which is control panel, networking, and other things, but you can see that there's some things which are PC over IP, okay? VMware Blast, VMware DEM, Horizon client configuration, and all these things with VMware. These things will appear now because we've just imported those AMDX and AMDL files into our domain controller, and now it's aware of it, and now you have these settings to actually be able to configure it. So it's just that easy, isn't it? You just put the files in the location and now you can use it. So that's pretty straightforward. So with the AMDX files copied into the correct locations, these settings can be configured under the administrative template policies, definitions, blah, blah, blah. There's a little bit more underneath that, but there's no point writing the whole thing. So I think if you can't find it by that stage, there's probably you won't find it. All right. I know, Roman, you will be familiar with this, the loopback processing policy. Okay, so basically this is not a VMware policy. It's not part of the things we just imported. It's just there on all Active Directory group policies. Doesn't matter where you, what environment you're in. So this configure loopback processing, basically, let's just go back and revisit how policies are applied. So remember how we had policies which has computer setting and user settings, right? So basically when your computer, your workstation boots up, it will apply the computer policies. When a user logs in, it will apply the user policies. Okay, so you can see that the computer policies get applied first, then the user policies. Well, yeah, remember what we said when we did group policies? It doesn't matter. It's almost like it doesn't matter what the previous policy did, unless it's enforced. You can actually overwrite those policies with a secondary policy that executes afterwards, right? like I've used the term before in my classes, where if I told you, if I had this room to paint and I got 6 people, and I told you, Roman, to come in and paint the room in black on Monday, and I got another person to come in on Tuesday and paint the room red, and I go on Wednesday to inspect the room, what color is the room? Exactly. That's what I mean by the order of when the settings are applied is important, because what you end up with is almost, if it's the same setting, it's the last thing that's applied. So what's the point of this loopback policy then? So if computer policies are executed first, then the user policy when they log on, then obviously the computer policy might not be there, right? So what this loopback policy does is actually, if we read it, with every group policy, you've got a bit of a description here. This policy setting directs the system to apply the group policy objects for the computer to any user who logs on to this computer affected by this setting. So what does that mean? So it means we are going to reapply the computer policy after the user logs in again. So basically, why do we need this? So the scenario is where there's multiple users sharing the same desktop, the same virtual desktop. Okay, so basically the floating instant clones. Okay. Configuration needs. We need to enable loopback processing, loopback policy processing. The purpose is to ensure that the configuration changes by one user applied to all users on the same shared desktop. Okay, so basically, if one user policy will apply to all users, but it's important for a kiosk environment where you're using full clones. It's not applicable to instant clones which are reset after logoff. So for us, we just do it, but it's not really that important. It's for those persistent virtual persistent clones. Okay, if you remember, we talked about persistent clones as in it's the same machines that gets used over and over again by people. Whereas we're using instant clones, so they just get deleted, reset, and we relaunch it from the image. So it makes no difference for us, but it's very important to talk about because it's affecting the persistent clones. All right, so there's there's Horizon computer settings, GPOs. So there's some settings which are specific to PC over IP. VMware Blast settings can be configured for these specific protocols. For the purpose of this course, we'll be focused on other settings as we have chosen to use Microsoft RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. To be honest, yeah and no. You're going to see that in our worksheets, we're going to actually change our protocol. Remember how we configured the virtual desktop pool so that the defaults to RDP? That's fine. But we're going to change the settings as a user because we allowed that. We're going to change it to VMware Blast. And the VMware Blast is a little bit better, in my opinion, for the features and settings we are able to access. So let's continue. So if we look at these things, so the following are Horizon configuration settings. So Horizon client configuration settings. Okay, client. That's a key word. There's some things which are for URL, the agent, common configuration, the VMware View Server configuration, but the VMware Horizon client configuration is where the bulk of what we're going to do is in. Okay, so if we look at these, like I said, there's literally millions, not millions, but literally hundreds of settings. Okay, and a lot of the time, it's fairly obvious what they mean. Okay. So for example, this one allow Blast connections to use operating system proxy settings. Remember, we just talked about the VMware Blast. Let's talk about VMware Blast connections and to use the system proxy. Here's another one. Let's pick out some just to talk about. Oh, remember a hotkey? Remember in your VMware workstation, if you don't have VMware tools installed, and you want to switch from the virtual machine back to your physical machine, you have to press the Control-Alt to release your mouse, right? So that's what's called hotkeys, like Control-Delete is a hotkey. So we can actually configure what hotkeys will give focus to the virtual desktop and what will release focus to the endpoint computer. And obviously, There's a few other things we'll talk about. Let's just keep on going. So some settings that we will investigate include allow data sharing. This is kind of funny, okay? This is something that doesn't sound good. It's disabled by default because it's to do with privacy, isn't it? If we allow data sharing, it's not what you think. It's not sharing data between your endpoint device and the VMware virtual desktop. It allows data sharing policies, enables VMware to collect anonymous data from your client devices for use in aiding support and compatibility issues. It's just like reporting back to VMware. So that doesn't sound good, does it? It sounds like privacy issues could be thing, but the good thing is by default, this policy is set to enabled and can be disabled, okay? So we can disable it definitely. Allow display scaling. It basically is what it a lot of these things is what it literally is saying. So allow display scaling allows this setting allows you to configure the display scaling feature for desktops and application settings. So basically how the scale of the desktop. Save resolution and DPI to server. So this one, if you enable this one, then the Horizon client will automatically save the resolution and DPI scaling. Then when you then user logs in the next time, these settings will be applied to the same one. So they always get the same, okay? Automatically check for updates. So that's like the Horizon client. Remember the client software that we haven't actually installed it yet. So remember when we connect, oh, sorry, I should show you. Actually, I realized, so I should actually show you. So let's go to the worksheet. And remember last lesson's worksheet? We just look at last lesson's worksheet. Right towards the end, when on the end device, let's go. Oh, no, that's it. On the end device, we connect this in the browser. We connected this URL. Okay, so that's fine. We got this picture, and we got to choose install the VMware client or use the HTML access, which doesn't require a client, just goes through the browser. And for last week's purposes, we just used this because this allowed us to connect quickly. But if you are going to use this end device over and over again, and it's compatible with VMware Horizon client, then so this next worksheet that we're going to do today, we are going to, where is it? Wrong one. This one. We are going to, instead of actually using the browser, we are going to right at the start, we are going to get this file and we're going to install it. Okay, that's the Horizon client. Instead of downloading it from the server, which would redirect you to the internet anyway, we are giving you the files and you're going to install it. It's a very quick wizard, just next, install, and then restart your computer. Okay, and then after that, what happens then? After that, what happens is that you have this client, you have this desktop icon, VMware Horizon client, and it's just a program now. You double click on it, and you opens up a window, and at this point we add a server, and we add the Horizon client server, and we tell it to connect. We're going to get the normal error because it's a warning, not error. Normal warning to say that the certificate's self-signed. We've seen that so many times, haven't we? So we don't care because we created this. So we click continue. And you notice that here, that's the problem, okay? So the HTTPS, the self-signed certificate, we log in with the user account and their password, click login, and then we see the sort of entitlements, the virtual desktop entitlements. So in this case, we're going to change it. So we're going to click on this, and then when this launches, there's going to be a couple of dots, and we're going to look at the settings, and we're going to change it to VMware Blast. Remember we said that we're going to change it from remote desktop to VMware Blast for this vSphere client. And once we do that, you know how it is with group policies. So if you remember, group policies could take up to 120 minutes to apply once you create them. Okay, it's automatically applied when the computer turns on, the computer policies, or when the user logs in for the user policies. But the problem is, if you remember, these virtual machines, virtual desktops are already running. Remember, they're spare. They're on as spare, aren't they? So remember, if they're already turned on as spare, when we log in, the computer is already turned on, isn't it? So therefore, we might have to do a GP update. If you remember, GP update means group policy update. We're going to do force, and then we're going to restart the virtual desktop, and then we're going to reconnect. And we might have to do this twice, because don't forget, once we connect to the first one, a spare one is launched again, isn't it? Yeah, so therefore, if we then connect again, we might connect to the spare one, not the original one. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, and again, as a result, that might not have the group policy applied. So we might do it again, and by that time, what should have happened is that you should almost guarantee that at least both of them will be restarted, because the initial one plus the spare, they're both restarted, and then you connect and you should be able to see the group policies take effect. What you should see is that the screen becomes full screen straight away, because that's something we're going to configure. You should see that we are able to copy and paste, like for example, if I copy and paste a whole bunch of text here, we should be able to paste it inside the virtual machine, and basically, we should be able to paste inside the virtual machine to a notepad, because we can shared clipboards basically. And if we plug in a USB stick, we might get this thing pop up, and we get allowed, and basically we should be able to access the USB stick on the virtual desktop. And that's about it. Okay, so we're going to have a look at a few settings, because like I said, there's literally thousands of settings or hundreds of settings specific to the VMware. So there's no way we can look at every one of them. And I'm not going to try to look at every one. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Well, like I said, with the web browser, you got to be careful, because some of these features are specific to client, and some of these features are specific to all. So if we look at this, it's a vSphere Horizon client configuration, isn't it? Okay, if it's to do with the Horizon client configuration, then it's applying to when you connect with the VMware Horizon client. Whereas there's other things which are for the VMware Blast, there's other things for your agent and so forth, they will be applied, doesn't matter how you connect, okay? But because we're configuring this VMware client configurations today as our example, we must connect with the VMware Horizon client software. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, so here it is, VMware browser redirections, okay, right here. Okay, so that might be what you're talking about here, but obviously the examples we're using today, like I said, I can't do everything, okay? Yeah, so that's something we have to look at in your specific system. All right, so having said that, I think that I need to just do something in the background, because I realize, that I might have not accidentally might have not copied something. Okay, so bear with me for a second. Just on the other screen, I was supposed to do it this morning, but then I got distracted. So I think this one. And what we're going to do is I'm going to put it on the IT Studies NAS, subject files, diploma. Here. Okay, let me paste it. So basically, I'm just, if you look at the other, I was on the other screen, sorry. So if you look at this, there's that bundle we need with all the ADMX files. Okay, so that's on the L drive, IT studies, NAS subject files, the normal place. And there's that client, VMware Horizon client software that we need to install on our physical machine. Okay, so we need, for today's worksheet, we need those two things additional to your VMs. Okay, so let's keep on going. Okay, so bear with me. Let me just get myself back in order. All right, so we were up to the check for updates. Yeah, so the Horizon checking for updates. Basically, Horizon client will check for updates because obviously, like any software, it needs to be updated occasionally. The other one is the synchronize keypad scroll lock and caps lock. What am I talking about? I'm literally talking about the keyboard, okay? The scroll lock, caps lock, and num lock, all those kind of things. Because it'll be, I'm sure it's a little bit annoying when you switch from the real device to a physical virtual desktop. If you had a caps lock or num lock, it just matches up, okay? So that's something little, but it's sometimes annoying if it's not. Oh, sorry. So then there's the skip Horizon update. So what does that mean? If the client needs to be updated, maybe the person doesn't want to do a restart. Okay, so basically, if we allow users to skip the Horizon update, then we can, as the name suggests, the user will be able to skip it, and then they won't need to be prompted again until the new update and applies, until the next time, basically. And obviously, then there's the enable Horizon online update. So that, again, this policy allows you to configure whether or not the Horizon client can update using the online update feature going onto the internet. This is supported for, obviously, the current version of the client. The older ones may not have this thing. And there's an update message pop-up. So this update, this setting basically allows you to configure the message that will pop up to the user if they have to update their client. It's just for communication with the user, basically. And you could make it polite. By default, this setting is disabled and is supported with, so by default, this is turned off, but you can personalize the message, customize the message. All right. So this URL for Horizon Online Update, basically this policy specifies the URL where to download the Horizon client updates. You can type the address, so you can be a custom address, not just from anywhere. You could tell it where to go. All right, so there's automatic input focus in the virtual window. So this policy, when enabled, brings the virtual desktop window display in the Horizon client. Sorry, I just noticed that with this, I'll fix that up a little bit later. I can see the size of the fonts is weird, right? So I just need to fix that up. So this policy brings the virtual desktop windows display in the Horizon, the client, to the forefront. So what does that mean? When you connect, it comes to the front straight away. Okay, meaning that the end user will be able to use the virtual desktop immediately without having to click the window to give it a focus. It gives it focus automatically. Something silly, something that you can do or you don't have to do, but it's just if you want to. Okay. Also, this automatically installs shortcuts when configured on the Horizon server. This policy configures shortcuts and whether they should be automatically installed onto the Horizon client when they have been configured on the server. If you enable this one, then the end user is not prompted and the shortcuts are installed automatically. But if you have disabled, then the shortcuts will not be installed. Finally, if you set this policy to be not configured, then the user will get a pop-up to say, do you want to install the shortcuts? Block multiple Horizon client instances per Windows session. So this is an interesting one as well. So if you have one end user, they could potentially connect to multiple virtual desktops. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that a waste of resources? So if we actually turn this on, they would only be able to launch one virtual desktop at a time. Okay, meaning they can't launch like 6, 7, 10, because if they by default they can do many. Okay? If you want only one session per end user, then enabling this policy will prevent end users from launching more than one session by allowing them to launch a single instance of Horizon Client. And like, to be honest, why do they need multiple sessions? Okay, are they sharing their credentials then? Right, so really they only can use one, but there might be a situation where they need multiple. Maybe this person needs, multiple end devices, and they're doing something, I don't know what, but they might be doing something where they need multiple connections from multiple end devices. Disabling this policy means that the user can launch more than one session, and so that's what by default this policy is set to disable. So be careful. Obviously, we don't want to waste our resources, but this is what's there by default. But to be honest, the only person using it in our environment is ourselves. So we're probably got to be careful not to launch too many sessions. Because that's the other question I was going to ask you, Roman. Yeah, that's why I asked you, did you finish the worksheet from last week? Because when you finish the worksheet from last week and you launch the client, I just want to know how well your computer is performing at that point in time. Because if it's really performing badly, poorly, then we have to maybe do something. Okay, if it's working okay, because on the laptop where I'm developing these worksheets, I'm making these worksheets and I'm testing all these things, I've got 64 gigs of RAM. So I for each of the virtual machines like the vCenter, the ESXi, the Horizon server, I gave a lot more resources, and I've got like 24. Is it 24? Yeah, probably 24 CPU cores. So I gave them a lot more resources on mine, just so I can do it faster than on a client than a student computer, if you know what I mean. So that's why I wanted to ask you, so that I can get that feedback from you. Yeah. So basically, if it's not running too well, so obviously right at the start when you just launch it, of course it's going to be a little bit slow. But if you leave it for a while, does it settle down? Does it become usable, or is it so slow you can't use it? So that's the kind of feedback I want to get from you eventually. Okay. If we look at this, the VMware Horizon configuration, I reckon that previous slide was an error, so I better fix that. Quick second. So that's what we're talking about there. Yeah. So bear with me for a quick sec. So I'll fix that. I reckon I did something, and it's one of those silly things where yeah, that's the one. It's one of those silly things where I didn't realize I had. So you see half of this is on the other slide already. All right, so that's the reason. So I'll fix that and I'll re-upload it anyway. So we were up to the disabled desktop disconnect message. This policy specifies whether or not the disconnection message that are shown by default are disabled when the disconnection is not initiated by the user. So for example, if something else disconnects the user, not themselves logging off. For example, when the administrator forcibly logs off the user to do some maintenance tasks, then you can display a message to them. Disable time zone forwarding. So by default, what this means is allows the time zone synchronization between your client and the virtual desktop. Okay, so allows this synchronization. Like we said, what if we're not in the same country? You know what I mean? Yeah. So we can actually do that. So this disable toast notification. A toast. This sounds funny, doesn't it? Toast notification. What's a toast notification? A toast notification. 1 second, Robert. A toast notification is an animated Windows 10 notification, and I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's the ones that pop up on the side. You know the notification. Sorry, let me just. So you know how these notifications right here, I don't have any notifications, but when those notifications pop up here, that's what's called a toast notification. And that's what it's talking about there, okay? So let me just get back to that. So toast notification is an animated Windows 10 notification message that appears lighting in and out of the screen on the end user's desktop. Disallow passing through the client information. So we're talking about the physical device now that the client is installed on. So for example, enabling this policy means the Horizon client running inside the session, then it will send the physical endpoint information relating to the VM. So for example, your physical devices information. Enable relative mouse, so improves the mouse performance, particularly when running graphical-based applications. Is for PC over IP. Okay, that's another protocol. Remember, there was a VMware Blast, PC over IP, or a remote desktop. Yeah. Oh, so this thing. Oh, so this is basically just improves the performance of the mouse. So it's like, you know, how well the mouse moves and stuff like that. It's not that super important. It's just like if you're using this particular protocol, it might be more efficient to send the mouse signals in a certain way. So basically, it's just better performance. You know what I mean? That's all right. So this is something we will be configuring. So this desktop layout. So this is something easy to see. So I basically picked a couple of settings that it's easy to see if they're working or not. And basically desktop layout. So basically in VMware Horizon client, so inside a window, right? So when you connect to the virtual desktop, is it going to be full screen? Is it going to be multiple monitors? Or is it just a large window, small window? It depends on what the default action you want it to be. So we're going to make a full screen, and hopefully when you connect, you'll see it goes full screen straight away. Okay. There's the lock guest. So basically, is that going to lock the guest computer? Accounts used for unauthenticated access. By default, it can be configured an account to use to log into the Horizon client and connection service anonymously. You're probably going, why would you want that? Well, what if it's a kiosk machine? All right, and just want some basic functionality, basic access to some browser or something like that. And instead of having a full desktop machine there, you could have just a very simple device, like a lot of monitors. Like I'm sure your home PC, right? I'm sorry, your home computer. Not home computer, home TV. Your TV at home. You might, if you have a smart TV, it's got a browser already, right? And if it's Android, you can install an Android client, for example, Horizon client for Android. So if it's an Android smart TV, you might actually just put that little TV as a kiosk machine in front of your web cafe, for example, and maybe you can allow the users to do something on there. So therefore, they might use this unauthenticated anonymous access to connect to a session where they can just do basic tasks. All right, so disconnect USB devices to the desktop or remote application when they are plugged in. That's something we're going to do. And so this is based on when it's plugged in. This next one is based on plug in. Sorry, we're going to do this one. We're going to plug in all USB devices, connect all USB devices on the remote application at launch. So that's when it turns on. Disable third-party terminal service plugins. So third-party means not you, not VMware, someone else. Okay. If you enable this policy, then no checking will take place for third-party terminal service plugins that are installed as a normal RDP plugin. Horizon-specific plugins such as USB redirection are not affected by this. So this is third-party, which is in this case Microsoft's. Okay. Here's some security settings, and like I said, there's like talking about trusted delegations and so forth. We're not going to go through all of these. It's a little bit boring at this stage because, to be honest, we're not going to be able to see the results if we configure it. I've only picked the ones where you can see the results. There's something you can do, something you can see, or something you can observe. Okay, so these security ones, we can do a bit of research when we need to talk about them, but right now we're going to just skip over it. Here's some USB configurations, and we're going to do one of these, allow audio output devices. What does that mean? That means it's going to send the sound from your virtual desktop into your physical device. And obviously, if we're playing a sound, we want to hear it, right? So that's the reason, okay? And you can see that there's other things here as well, including the video devices. So like, I think there's something about video devices here. So I think it's in here somewhere. I can't, here, allow video devices. That's just the same as your webcam, isn't it? Okay. So this is some browser redirections, which is going to give you that camera and a webcam and microphone redirection to your browser inside the virtual desktop. Then there's the printing. So obviously, if we have a physical printer connected to our physical device, we want to make sure that that virtual desktop, when we click print, can come out of the virtual desktop into our physical end device and into the printer, so we can print on our physical printer that's right next to us. This URL redirection, basically, this allows prevents user from changing the URL redirection plugins. There's all these other ones, redirect protocol HTTP to some other site. Clipboard audit, so it determines the direction the clipboard audit is allowed. You can select these values. You can disable in both directions. You can enable clients to server only. That is, information of the clipboard data is copied from the client to the server, but maybe you don't want the server to the client. But you can also enable it for server to client or from both. Okay, so it depends on how you want to be. The memory size, that's something silly, to be honest. Like clipboard is whatever you're saving to a clipboard, text, picture, whatever, but you can configure the size of the memory. And here, the clipboard redirection, that's talking about the direction that we talked about here. Okay, clipboard redirection. So we can determines the direction in which the clipboard is allowed. You can redirect one way or the other way, and so forth. And configure file transfer. This is not something we actually did, but it sounds interesting. This policy allows you to enable file transfer between the agent and HTML access, and configure whether uploads and downloads are allowed. So we didn't do this in our worksheet, but it's something that you can obviously do yourself if you're interested. But basically, it's almost, if you think about it, it's almost like our VMware tools for our virtual VMware workstation allows us to do things, copy and paste in and out of the virtual machine. This is almost like us doing the same thing from our endpoint device into the virtual desktop machines. Okay. Collaboration. So collaboration is allowing control passing to collaboration. Remember we talked about if we wanted to help troubleshoot the client's problems, we want to see their session, don't we? So that means collaboration, but we're allowing passing collaborators, meaning that we allow control. So basically, besides the administrator seeing it, that you can actually, they can not just administrator, but they can give it to someone else to control their computer. And there's other ones where you can invite the collaboration by email, by instant messaging, and so forth. Then there's this drag and drop, which is to do with basically the drag and drop instead of copy and paste. Okay. And finally, there's the smart card redirection. So obviously, I'm sure you're aware what a smart card is, but if you've heard of multi-factor authentication, some highly secured industries require you to, besides log in, besides having a code, it also needs you to have your card plugged in while you're connecting to their computer. All right, so for example, my friend who works in the Department of Defense, he needs that. In fact, he's got real strange, some very strange rules, not strange, but understandable rules. It's restrictive rules. For example, someone got in trouble because they traveled overseas and tried to connect to the virtual desktop in the Department of Defense. You know, obviously, if it's Department of Defense, it's all top secret stuff, right? If you're overseas, who knows who's got you with a gun to your head and making you connect, isn't it? So basically, they have those kind of rules, and one of the rules is redirecting the smart card that's plugged into your physical end device into the virtual machine, which gives you the multi-factor authentication so you can actually access it. So like I said, today is a relatively quick presentation, and also the worksheet is not too long either.